The fat woman everyone avoided married the village bricklayer, and together they built the largest store in the region. In the village, she was called dead weight. The women whispered, the young men laughed behind her back, and even her own aunts humiliated her. She was the woman who, according to everyone, would die alone, invisible to those who saw her body only as a flaw. But one man saw her, a bricklayer with calloused hands and few words, who didn't see excess. He saw a person. While the village mocked, saying it was pity or charity, they quietly began building something together. This story isn't about the store they raised, it's about how they built it. And it all began with the first brick. A compliment no one at the market noticed, but that changed everything. It was on a stifling Tuesday morning that Maria went down to the market wearing a new dress, not new from a store, but new from herself, sewn by her own hands, under the light of a kerosene lamp. Between one wave of sadness and another, she had carefully cut the old fabric, measured the pieces with a worn-out tape, and stitched them together as if embroidering hope into every seam. It was a deep blue, like the sky before the rain, with small white thread details on the bodice and sleeves. It wasn't a fancy dress, but it was the first she had made for herself, after years of sewing for others, and hearing she was too big to wear anything beautiful. She wasn't expecting compliments. She never did. She left home with her head down, carrying a bag of flour and a courage, disguised as routine. She walked among the stalls as if stepping on glass. Each step carried a memory of mockery. Each sound of laughter came with the fear of being its cause, until, as she turned the corner by the cassava stand, she saw Iko, the bricklayer, loading sandbags into his cart, with steady arms and a sweaty brow. She looked away, ready to hear the same silence as always. But he spoke. That dress, it's beautiful. Maria stopped, unsure if he was talking to her. She looked around. There was no one else. Did you make it yourself? She nodded, not knowing what to say. Not because she lacked words, but because no one had ever said anything good about her appearance. No man, not even out of politeness, had ever noticed what she was wearing, much less asked if she had made it. Good stitching, firm thread, looks like the dress of a woman who knows what she wants. That was it. Just that. 3 sentences, spoken naturally. But in Maria, it struck like thunder in a dry sky. She kept walking as if nothing had happened, but her hands trembled. When she got home, she let the bag drop onto the dirt floor, sat on the stool by the window, and cried as she hadn't in a long time, not out of sadness, but out of surprise. For the first time, a man hadn't looked at her body as if it were wrong. He had looked at her creation, at her skill, at her presence, and he saw beauty where others saw excess. That day, the dress became armor, not because it shielded her from the cruel comments, which came just the same, but because now, deep in her chest, there was a different memory, a clean gaze, a sincere compliment, and no one could erase that dot. In the markets of the days that followed, Maria walked with more firmness. She still carried the invisible stones thrown by other people's eyes, but her body didn't bend as before, because now, she knew she could be seen, not as a body outside the standard, not as the woman nobody wanted, but as someone who could sew, who had steady hands, and who, yes, knew what she wanted. And Iko remained the same. He didn't force meetings, he didn't hand out daily compliments, but whenever he saw her, he said good morning with the same calmness, as if he didn't need to prove anything, as if he already knew that, one day, they would build something, even if they didn't yet know what. The townsfolk didn't notice. To them, he was just the quiet bricklayer, and she was the fat woman who wore a blue dress. But there, in that unnoticed compliment, lay the first brick of a construction that would change everything, because it was the first gaze that saw beyond the body, and sometimes that's all it takes for an entire life to begin to change. It was on a stifling night, the kind when crickets sing loudly and the moon seems to peer into houses through the cracks in the windows, that Maria decided to tell her mother she'd been talking to Iko. It wasn't dating, nor a secret romance, just conversation, words exchanged between one work shift and the next, between her trip to the water pump and his return from the construction site. But the truth was, she wanted to share it with someone, and despite all the old wounds, she still believed her mother was the safest harbor she had. Her mother, Donna Zomera, was a woman with a hardened face and eyes always on guard. She had lived through abandonment after abandonment, raised her children with her bare hands, without a man who stayed, without a penny left over. and from so many blows from life, she had learned to expect the worst. She distrusted everything. People who smiled too much, gifts given out of season, compliments from men. She said nothing in this world was free, least of all affection. Maria sat by the hammock, a bowl of beans in her lap to shell. She tried to speak lightly, as if commenting on a coincidence. I met Aiko today on the road. He helped me with a heavy bag. We talked a bit. Zulmira didn't lift her eyes. She kept stirring the cornmeal in the pot with a wooden spoon, as if nothing had been said. He's a good bricklayer. Maria tried. Silence. Only the sound of the spoon scraping the bottom of the pot. Then Zulmira spoke, without changing her tone. A man who gets close to a woman alone, especially one your size, is looking to take advantage. The words hit Maria like stones to the chest, not because of their harshness, she'd heard worse from outsiders, but because they came from her own mother. And the worst part wasn't the judgment of the bricklayer, but the hidden message that she, being who she was, didn't deserve to be loved. That affection, for a woman like her, could only be a trap. She tried to smile, as if unfazed, but the hand holding the beans began to tremble. He didn't ask for anything, mother, not to come in, not to eat, not to sit on the stoop. He just treated me with respect. Zulmira put down the spoon and looked at her firmly. Respect is what they show at the start. Then come the requests, the touches, the disappearances. I've seen this before, Maria. A bricklayer is a man with quick hands and an uncertain future. Today he's here, tomorrow he's taking a job in another town and leaves you with a belly in shame. The kitchen went silent. Only the hiss of the cornmeal cooking broke the heavy air. Then Maria replied, and it wasn't with anger or shouting. It was with the serenity of someone who had been beaten down by life but still chose to believe. I'd rather have calloused hands than the fake smiles of the others. Zulmira scoffed, as if tired of teaching what no one wanted to learn, but she said nothing more. She went back to her cornmeal, and Maria kept shelling the beans more firmly, even though her eyes were brimming. That night, she didn't sleep early. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many times she'd been told no man would stay with her, how many times they'd said her body was a burden, her mouth too big, her laugh too loud, that she was a woman to serve, not to be loved. And now that someone treated her with kindness, the world came to say it was a trap. But there was something different about Aiko. It wasn't just the clean gaze. It was the absence of urgency, the lack of rush, the way he spoke calmly, as if listening more than talking. And above all, it was his silence, a silence that didn't judge, didn't want to take, didn't demand anything. Maria knew her mother didn't speak out of malice. She spoke out of fear, from having loved wrong, trusted too much, been betrayed, without warning. But deep down, Maria felt her story didn't have to follow the same script. The next day, she wore the blue dress again, not to provoke anyone, but to remind herself she could be a woman with dreams. And when she saw Aiko near the warehouse, he simply asked, "Do you sew for others?" And she smiled, because in that question lay everything she needed to hear. He didn't want to come in, he wanted to add, and without realizing it, they were starting to build what no one believed possible. A simple love, without cheap promises, but with a solid foundation, made of respect and faith. Maria's joy began like a breeze, small, almost invisible, but anyone who has felt the constant chill of contempt can recognize even the faintest breath of affection as an early spring. She didn't talk much about Aiko. There was no declared courtship, no vows exchanged under the moon, but it was enough to see them sitting under the shade of the cashew tree, sharing a roasted corn in a cup, to know that something was taking root there. And in the village, where other people's lives are the main dish, nothing grows in silence without being spied on. The first to whisper were the neighbors from the street up the hill, women who had long forgotten what it was like to be looked at with tenderness. They said Maria was using tricks, that she was hooking the man through his stomach, that with enough couscous and sweet corn porridge, even a rock could get itself a husband. And they laughed loud enough for her to hear, but not enough to own their poison. They laughed while passing by her house, while gossiping at the market, while crossing paths with Aiko and pretending not to understand what he saw in her. The men didn't spare them either. They muttered between sips that Aiko was losing his mind, that with so many slim women around, he had to go and get tangled up with a fat seamstress. Some mocked him openly, calling him the heavyweight bricklayer, as if loving a woman outside the norm was something to joke about. Iko, however, remained unshaken. He didn't retaliate, didn't answer back, didn't run away. When provoked, he would simply look up and say, while they talk, "We're raising our walls." And that phrase became a wall between them and the rest of the world. Because that's exactly what they were doing. Brick by brick, building a space where the gaze was clean. The touch was gentle, and love didn't depend on measurements or anyone's approval. And that disturbed people. It disturbed them more than any scandal could. The village, used to seeing Maria as a background figure, couldn't stand watching her bloom, especially with a good man by her side. It was as if her happiness were an affront, as if her existence was only acceptable when she was small, sad, alone. When they started appearing together at the market, him carrying the bags, her holding his hand, naturally, the world seemed to stop for a second. Sideways glances, forced smiles, a brief silence followed by malicious remarks. "She must have done some witchcraft," said an older woman, shaking her head as if lamenting a tragedy. "Or he just feels sorry for her." "Poor thing," replied another, poking through a bucket of fish, as if stirring up old wounds. Maria heard it all. She wasn't deaf, nor naive. She knew that for many there, happiness was only allowed for the slim, the young, the discreet. But there was something in her that changed with each passing day. It wasn't pride, nor arrogance. It was certainty. Certainty that true love doesn't ask permission from judgment. And that, for the first time, she didn't have to beg for. Affection, it came to her. Even so, there were hard days. Days when the words hit harder, when the laughter cut deeper. Mornings when she thought of retreating, of returning to the comfortable invisibility. But all it took was remembering Isio's gaze, the firmness with which he held her hand, the respectful silence he offered when she needed to break down and she would stand back up. One such morning, as she left to buy flour, a woman looked her up and down and muttered, "Looks like you think you're somebody now, parading around with a man like a queen." Maria stopped. She looked the woman in the eye, not with anger, but with the serenity of someone who knows who she is. "I'm no queen, but I'm loved with truth, and that not everyone has." The woman fell silent, and Maria walked on, because the village could talk, mock, invent, but it was already too late. The building had begun, and no gossip in the world could tear down what was being raised on the ground of respect, courage, and love. The proposal didn't come with flowers, candles, or a man on one knee. It happened on a hot afternoon, under a mango tree, while Maria mended a torn hammock and Ika was trimming wood for a new chicken coop. "Have you ever thought about getting married?" he asked, with the same ease, as if he were wondering whether it would rain before the day was over. Maria paused her stitching. She looked at him without laughing, without blushing. She simply let the silence say that yes, she thought about it every day but had never had the courage to wish it out loud. "A big party's not possible," he said, "but truth, that we have." She nodded, and that nod was firmer than any shouted yes at an altar. It was the beginning of something that didn't need witnesses to be sacred. In the village, weddings had always been grand events. When it was slim young women, daughters of well-known families, there was music, big pots of food, colorful ribbons, and dancing until dawn. But for Maria and Iko, there was no procession, no lace dress, no guests from afar. And even so, it was the most sincere wedding that soil had ever seen. On the morning of the union, Maria woke before sunrise. She put on the cleanest clothes she had, tied a light scarf over her hair, and dabbed her wrists with lavender leaves, just as her grandmother used to do on prayer days. Iko showed up in a pressed shirt and shoes polished with candle wax. In his pocket, he carried a simple brass ring bought at the second-hand market, but it gleamed like gold in the palm of his calloused hand. They walked together to the home of the village elder, Signor Babajiji, a man of faith and respect, who for years had blessed marriages with more weight than any judge. He welcomed them from his porch, with deep-set eyes and a voice that trembled slightly. "A marriage that begins with truth, no gossip can destroy." The words hung in the air, as if time itself had stopped to listen. When it came time for the blessing, the elder placed his hands on their heads, asked them to look into each other's eyes, and promise not wealth, nor a big house, nor abundance, but respect, patience, and truth. And that's what they did. No music, no witnesses, no crowd, only the three of them, and the soft breeze that crossed the yard like an invisible guest. After the prayer, they sat together to share a plate of yams with oil, which Maria had prepared with care. They ate in silence, but with light smiles, and there, in that unpretentious simplicity, lay the purest of sacraments. When they returned home, Maria was met with sideways glances from neighbors whispering behind doors. Some laughed at the lack of a party, a dress, or a bouquet. Others murmured that it was shameful, that it wasn't even a real wedding. But she wasn't shaken, because that day, for the first time, she felt whole, not from others' approval, but from Ico's steady gaze and the respectful way he held her hand. Zulmera, her mother, hadn't attended. She said she couldn't bless what she didn't understand. She stayed home, sitting on the doorstep, feigning indifference. But later that night, while Maria was washing dishes in the basin and Ico was hammering a hook into the wall, she appeared at the door with a pot of corn porridge. "I warmed it for you too. It's what you offer to those starting something." She handed them the pot and left. No hugs, no sweet words. But Maria understood. In her own way, her mother was saying she was beginning to accept, and that was enough. That night, lying in hammocks side by side, with the windows open to the starry sky, Maria and Ico slept like those who have built a home with their own hands. There was no big house yet, no plastered walls, no store up and running, but there was faith, and where there is faith, the ground becomes a foundation. Their wedding was not spoken of at the village parties, nor turned into a framed photo, but, in time, it would become the root of something bigger than anyone there could have imagined, because it was on that day, without cake or guests, that Maria realized what truly matters is being blessed by someone who sees your soul, not by those who measure your worth by your body or your bank account. A few months after the wedding, when the villagers' whispers seemed finally tired of mocking, and the couple's routine had settled between sewing work and small construction jobs, Ico received news of an inheritance. It wasn't money, nor a house. It was a dry plot of land, more dust than soil, a piece of ground left to him by his father, a hard man who had barely spoken to his son, but who, before dying, handed over that lot as one might give the scraps of a plate to someone starving. It lay far from the center of the village, with sparse scrub, scattered stones, and a nearly rotten wooden fence. No one wanted anything to do with it, not for planting, not for building. The villagers said the land was cursed by abandonment. No man's land, good for nothing. Ico, as always, didn't complain. He took the key to the fallen gate, walked there with the calm of someone used to carrying life's weight on his shoulders, and stood still, staring at the nothing before him. Maria came along, silent, just holding his hand, as she always did when the world seemed bigger than the two of them. "At least it's ours," he said, kicking a stone on the cracked ground. Maria didn't answer. She let go of his hand and started walking. She scanned the dry bushes, measured the distance between shadows with her steps, crouched near a twisted root, and stayed there for a few minutes without a word. Ico watched her without understanding, but without interrupting either. He knew that look, the same one she had before, cutting fabric, narrowed eyes, lowered brow, as if she could see beyond what was in front of her. "This will be our shop," she said at last, with the certainty of someone who could already see the future drawn into the clay. Ico frowned. "Shop?" She nodded. "A real shop. Not just to sell things, but to welcome people. For sewing, for corn, for soap, for fresh bread, for anyone who wants to buy without being looked down on." He laughed, a small, shy laugh. "Here, you can barely plant cassava here, but you can plant hope," she answered without hesitation. That was the moment it all began again. Until then, they had been building love. Now they were starting to build a future. And, as always, the village mocked. When they heard the couple was trying to start a business in that cursed pit, they called it madness. Said Maria was filling Ico's head with too many ideas, that people like them should be content with little, with whatever life gives. But Maria was not a woman to take life's leftovers. She was a daughter of pain, but a sister too. Courage, and if she saw in that lot something no one else could, it was because her eyes had already crossed deserts far greater. In the days that followed, Ico began clearing the land. He pulled weeds with a hoe, removed debris, stacked stones, dug with his hands when the hoe failed. Maria brought water, food, and helped when she could, tying wooden beams, organizing crates, sketching the first shop plans in an old-school notebook. Everything was improvised, everything small, but everything done with dignity. At night, lying in their hammocks, they whispered about what they would sell. boiled corn and banana leaves, custom sewing, handmade soap, bread she had learned to make from her grandmother, and, above all, a different kind of service, no mockery, no rush, with respect, because more than products, Maria wanted to offer welcome. The village laughed. Some passed by just to peek and laugh at the crooked walls, the dirt floor, the shelves that existed only in her mind. They said, a poor man's shop, built from leftovers, won't last. But what they called leftovers, Maria called seeds, because to her, nothing was waste. What the world threw away, she transformed. One afternoon, as she painted one of the front boards, a child came up and asked, "Auntie, what's this going to be?" Maria smiled and replied, "This is going to be the place where no one leaves empty-handed." The boy laughed, not understanding, and ran off, but the phrase stayed, and one day it would be the shop's name, on that dry ground where no one wanted to plant. Dream walls were beginning to rise. There wasn't enough cement, nor modern tools, but there was faith. And faith, when joined with hard work and true love, can raise even a palace where the world sees only ruin. There was no funding, no sponsor, no bank loan, only a cleared plot of land, a few borrowed tools, goodwill, and whatever was left over from the jobs Aiko did for others. It was common for him to come home with crooked scraps of wood, hardened lumps of cement, bent nails, cracked tiles, and Maria, with her gift for turning what the world called trash into treasure, saw use in everything. The shop began like that, a dream stitched together among rubble. The first shelves were built from old crates, brought from the market, banana boxes, tomato boxes, dried fish boxes, all scrubbed with ash soap, dried in the sun, and nailed to the clay wall with a worn hammer. Aiko said it was risky, that they might collapse, but Maria would pad the edges with folded cloth, line them up with a makeshift wooden ruler, and smile. It doesn't need to be pretty, it needs to be firm. That's how the first shop corners appeared. One section with soap wrapped in newspaper, another with corn in braided sacks, farther along rows of thread, fabric, and ribbons arranged by color. Maria sewed at night, while Aiko slept, making sure the shelves were full the next morning. They also sold couscous, bean fritters, and coffee brewed in a cloth strainer. Everything simple, everything homemade, but everything tasting of care. At first, few people came in, most passed by just to look and laugh. Some of the village women said, a shop for people without schooling. No name, no sign, looks more like a junk shed than a business. But anyone who stepped inside saw otherwise. There was no luxury, but there was order. No refrigeration, but there was cleanliness. And above all, there was respect. Maria made a point of serving each person as if they were the only one. She called them by name, asked about their families, offered coffee even when there was no purchase. Aiko kept the place sturdy, replacing tiles, reinforcing shelves, building each detail as if he were raising a temple. And little by little, the impossible began to happen. First, a woman who had always shopped at the store up the street decided to try Maria's couscous. She said it was the best she'd eaten since her mother died. Then came a man in debt, whom no one else would sell to on credit. He arrived hat in hand, asking for soap. Maria looked him in the eye and said, "Here, no one leaves empty-handed." She gave him the soap. Didn't charge him then, but wrote it down in a blue notebook in careful script. Because credit wasn't charity, it was trust. Soon, more people came. Simple folk, people forgotten by the bigger shops, people who preferred to pay less but be treated with dignity. And the shop began to fill, not just with products, but with life. Children came for fresh bread before school. Women sat on the wooden bench to unburden themselves between purchases. Men left their change behind like making a promise. And the miracle took root there, in every corner of an old crate. Because it was more than sales, it was shelter. But envy, that bitter neighbor of another's success, grew as well. Some claimed Maria used strong prayers to draw customers, that the coffee was bewitched, that Aiko must be in debt, so deep he accepted such humiliation. She heard it, always heard it, but never answered back. She had already learned that the best reply was to keep growing, and they did grow, shelf by shelf, brick by brick, day after day. The shop that had barely stood at first now had eucalyptus beams, a small awning out front, and even a hand-painted sign with crooked letters but full of truth. Maria's house, where no one leaves empty-handed. And it was in that place, built with leftovers, sweat, and hope, that people began to find not just goods, but comfort. Because sometimes, all someone needs is to step into a place with no luxury, but with respect. And there, among old crates and sincere smiles, Maria and Aiko proved that when love finds purpose, it becomes a pillar, and it holds up what no one believed could stand. As soon as the shop began to find its footing, with steady movement and the smell of fresh cake at the door, the eyes of the neighborhood, once filled with disdain, began to narrow with something else. Envy. But not just any envy. The kind that's born when someone who was once despised starts to bloom in front of those who always thought themselves superior. And among the many eyes watching, Maria and Ico's every step, one burned more than the rest. Adelia S., the wife of the shopkeeper from the upper street. Adelia was known for having everything a woman, in the village's eyes, should have. A big house with a veranda, fine dresses brought from the city, necklaces that jingled when she walked, and a husband who spoke loudly in the market, as if giving orders. But what no one saw or pretended not to see was the silence between them. A heavy, cutting silence. A marriage of appearances, where touch was absent and respect was rare. Adelia smiled with her lips, but her eyes hadn't laughed in a long time. When Maria's shop began to draw customers, Adelia started making loud remarks at the market, always within earshot of curious listeners. Real beauty is when a man buys a shop for his wife, not this nonsense of a woman killing herself working to build something with a bricklayer. The words came coated in sarcasm, like mud flung to dim someone else's shine. Some laughed, agreed, and fed the poison, but there were also those who began to notice the difference, because despite Adelia's linen dress, it was Maria whom people trusted, and even more, it was in the fat woman and the bricklayer's shop that people were treated well. Adelia's husband, Osvaldo, sometimes passed in front of Maria's house with a look of disgust. Once, seeing a line at the door, he spat on the ground and muttered, "That woman's getting too full of herself." But neither Adelia nor Osvaldo could explain why their shop, with polished shelves and a marble counter, was always empty of soul, while Maria's, with old crates and a dirt floor, was full of people, conversation, and welcome. What hurt Adelia wasn't the shop itself, it was what it symbolized. It was seeing Maria being loved, respected, valued. It was seeing Aiko, a simple man but present, raising walls beside his wife, sharing the fatigue, smiling at her with his eyes, something Osvaldo hadn't done in years. And no matter how hard she tried to hide it, Adelia's envy came from a longing she herself couldn't name, the longing to be looked at with tenderness. One afternoon, Adelia stepped into the shop for the first time. Her steps were stiff, her eyes haughty. She asked for half a kilo of soap, as if doing a favor. Maria served her like anyone else. With a discreet smile, she took the soap, weighed it on the plate scale, tied it up in a bag, and handed it over with both hands. "You want me to put it on the tab, or do you want to pay now?" Adelia asked in a challenging tone. "However you prefer," Maria replied calmly. Adelia pulled a note from her pocket and tossed it onto the counter. "I only bought it because the other shop ran out." Maria took the money, thanked her with the same serenity, and gave the change without altering her tone. No irony, no retort, just dignity. And that, more than any comeback, stung. In the days that followed, Adelia began walking more slowly past the shop. Sometimes she stopped, pretending to look at the sidewalk, but her eyes were always turned inward, as if trying to understand what was missing in her own home. It was a child who, without meaning to, spoke the truth everyone felt. Leaving the shop with a little cake in hand, the boy said loudly to his mother, "Mummy, this place is better than the other shop. It smells like Grandma's house." The phrase spread through the village, like wind in dry grass. And that was it. Maria's shop had what no other had, soul. It was made of struggle, of care, of presence. It was the result of true love, the kind that builds together, listens, and respects. Adelia had everything money could buy. But what Maria had, no gold in the village could bring. A partner who saw beyond her body, a space where she was called by name, and a people who, little by little, were beginning to see her as more than they had ever dared to admit. And so, brick by brick, Maria wasn't just building a shop. She was building a place where love, respect, and humility were worth more than any polished display. And for someone who had always been ignored, that was the most beautiful victory of all. It was a Friday morning, and the heat was already clinging to the skin before the sun reached the tops of the houses. Aiko was working at the side of the shop, expanding a small area in the back where Maria planned to set up a kitchen to bake cakes and bread on site. Ever since business had grown, she dreamed of selling everything fresh, warm, fragrant, the kind of smell that reaches the soul before it ever touches the stomach. And Aiko, as always, was turning the dream into wood, cement, and hammer blows. The scaffolding was improvised, made from reused planks and thick ropes. No modern tools, no professional support, just muscle, instinct, and faith. He had already climbed up and down dozens of times that day. Maria watched him from the shop's doorway, part of her worried, part of her admiring his skill. Customers came and went, children ran down the street, and the sound of the hammer blended with laughter, rustling bags, and snippets of conversation. It seemed like just another ordinary day. Until the silence came. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't commotion. It was the dull crack of breaking wood and a body hitting the ground, followed by the kind of silence that seems to stop time. The scaffolding gave way with a snap that still echoed in the ears of those who saw it. Aiko fell on his back, striking his shoulder and head on the packed earth before he could protect himself. Maria dropped everything. She ran as if her heart had leaped out of her chest. She shouted his name, but it was as if the world had gone deaf. Some neighbors came closer, others only peered from their windows. One or two offered help, but most just watched, with that mix of fear, curiosity, and judgment that only appears in other people's tragedies. Aiko was conscious, but couldn't move. His eyes searched for hers as if to say, "Hold me," even without words. Maria knelt beside him, cradled his head in her lap, and murmured quiet prayers, begging for protection, pleading that it wasn't serious. Someone ran to fetch the village healer. Others went to get a cart to take him to the nearest clinic. In the hours that followed, the shop's doors stayed shut. For days, Maria didn't think about selling, sewing, or smiling. She spent her nights sitting beside the hammock where he rested, placing cool compresses, spooning him water, shifting his body with the care of someone afraid to break what was already wounded. Aiko, even in pain and struggling to speak, would whisper whenever he could, "It'll pass. Don't let go of my hand." And she didn't, not for a second. Rumors spread. Some said he'd never walk again. Others said the shop would fail now. There were those who muttered it was punishment, that they had been getting too full of themselves. But no one expected what happened next, when, a week later, Maria reopened the shop. The silence returned, but this time it was different. A respectful, uneasy silence. The women who used to pass by laughing now entered with their heads bowed. They bought soap, coffee, flour, but spoke little, handing over coins without meeting her eyes. It was as if suffering had finally made them see. Some began helping without calling it help. One brought milk, another offered firewood, a third sent a good piece of cloth for sewing. And Maria, even without asking, accepted it all with a nod, storing in her heart the quiet miracle of watching other people's hearts open through pain. It took weeks for Aiko to walk again, but when he took his first steps, still uneven, still slow, he went to the front of the shop and, with a trembling hand, picked up a shovel leaning against the wall. Maria rushed to stop him, but he smiled. "Even if it's just to hold the shovel, I want to be here with you." And there he stayed, shovel in hand, seated on a makeshift bench, greeting customers as if to say, "We're still standing, even if it still hurts inside." That day, when a neighbor came in and asked for 3 loaves of bread, Maria handed them over with care. The woman hesitated, looked at Aiko and murmured, "God bless you both. We never know how much pain can bring hearts closer." It was the first time anyone in the village had openly acknowledged without mockery that this couple was made of something stronger than looks, gossip, or judgment. And so, through pain and silence, the village began to see there was something in Maria's house that no fall could bring down, the foundation of true love. And love like that, even when it falls, rises stronger. Over time, the once crooked walls of the shop grew stronger. Aiko recovered from the fall, returned to work with even more care, like someone who understands that the body's fragility does nothing to weaken the purpose. It was no longer just a little corner shop. It had become a landmark. People from other villages would pass by to buy soap, order sewing, or simply sit and have a coffee while resting from the walk. Maria began waking earlier, sleeping later. She sewed through the night, baked bread before the rooster crowed, and served customers with the smile of someone carrying fatigue on her back but faith in her heart. She no longer kept track of credit only in the blue notebook. Now she had a file, sorted by name, by day, by amount, not out of suspicion, but out of respect, to show that even those who couldn't pay right away had value, and were treated as customers, not charity cases. It was one late afternoon, the sky the color of wet clay, when Iko walked into the shop carrying a painted piece of wood. Maria was folding cloth, her back bent, her face damp with sweat. He said nothing. He simply placed the board at the front of the shop and pointed. Maria looked. Letters, painted by hand, were crooked, but there was a tenderness in them no fine brush could give. It read, Maria's house, where no one leaves empty-handed. She put her hand to her mouth. She didn't say anything for a long few seconds. She just sat on the doorstep and cried. Cried like someone who had waited a lifetime for recognition that had never come from family, neighbors, or friends, but was now there, hanging above the entrance for everyone to see. It wasn't ICO's shop, nor village grocery. It was Maria's house, the woman who had always been invisible, who had always been told she was too much to be loved, too much to dream, too much to have worth, now had her name carved as the pillar of the place she had built with her own hands. And more than that, with her heart. Some of the old mockers began to return. At first, they came with their heads low, saying they were just looking. Later, they asked for credit, and Maria, as always, didn't refuse. She handed over the goods with the same care, wrote down the name, the amount, and said, "Pay when you can. Here, no one leaves empty-handed. It wasn't revenge. It was justice with dignity." The children of the women who once mocked her now came to help deliver bread. A young man who had once laughed at her in the market now hauled goods for her, and every time he passed with the cart full, he greeted her with a good afternoon. Donna Maria, a mix of respect and regret. The shop grew quietly. No need for ads, bright signs, or loud music. It grew on the foundation of trust, on the strength of a name that had once been the punchline of a joke and was now a symbol of welcome. Once, a lady from the city, visiting her sister in the village, stepped into the shop and said, "This place smells like childhood, like Grandma's house." Maria smiled, because that's what she had wanted from the start. Not just to sell products, but to offer memory, comfort, a place for a weary soul to rest. The sign gathered color over time. One day, a child drew a heart beside her name. Another day, a young woman rejected by her family wrote, "Here, I felt human." And when people asked Maria why she had put her name on the sign, she answered, simply, "Because it was the first time someone believed I could have a house with my name on the door." The phrase spread like a blessing. And in the village where she had once been only the fat seamstress, she was now Donna Maria from the shop. Maria of the warm bread. Maria who helps without asking. And that, more than any public recognition, was the silent victory of someone who had never stopped building. Even when everyone said she didn't fit into other people's dreams. Now, she was the one dreaming. And others, little by little, were learning to dream with her. Because the shop, despite its clay walls and crate shelves, was already the biggest in the region. Not in size, but in respect, in truth, in love. And all of it was anchored to a name, the name of someone who was once avoided, and who now, no one forgets. The shop was now known throughout the entire region. People walked from distant villages just to breathe in the smell of Maria's coffee, hear a bit of wise advice, or take home a bar of handmade soap. But what drew people in the most wasn't the products, it was the atmosphere. It was as if, upon crossing the wooden doorway with its crooked painted letters, reading Maria's house, where no one leaves empty, people could set down the weight of the world's judgments, and find a place where a tired soul could breathe. It was on an ordinary afternoon. The sun warming people's shoulders and the shop's line snaking all the way to the tree out front, that the scene happened. A young woman, broad-bodied, with full cheeks and eyes always cast downward, approached for the first time. She wore a simple dress, the fabric a little tight around her hips, and walked in short steps, as if apologizing for existing. Behind her, two girls laughed, loud, shameless, without even trying to hide their scorn. "Look at that," another. "One who must think this is an all-you-can-eat buffet," said one. "She's gonna want credit and try to pay with her body," added the other, bursting into laughter. The line went silent. Some pretended not to hear. Others chuckled nervously. and a few stepped back as if the problem might be contagious. The heavy-set young woman froze on the sidewalk. Her eyes began to brim. She looked toward the shop as one looks toward the sky on a stormy day. She wanted to go in, but her body trembled. She turned to leave. That's when the door swung open. Maria stepped out, dishcloth still in her hands, feet planted firmly on the packed earth, eyes burning with a fury that didn't come from hate, but from an old pain, one she knew far too well herself. She looked straight at the two mockers. She didn't yell, she didn't insult, but she spoke with a firmness that even the wind seemed to stop to hear. The same mouth that mocks today may need bread tomorrow. The girl's eyes widened in embarrassment. One gave a nervous giggle, the other looked away. Maria went on. I've been that girl. I've been looked over from head to toe as if I were too much, as if my body should apologize for being in the world. I've heard laughter like yours, and yet, here I am, with my name on the door, with respect at the counter, and with a heart open even to those who haven't yet learned to hold back their cruelty. The silence that followed was like lightning splitting a clear sky. The two girls stepped back, one muttering a rushed apology before they both slipped away. Maria then turned to the young woman. She held out her hand, not just in gesture, but in gaze. The woman hesitated for a second, then stepped inside. What's your name? Maria asked. Naomi, she replied, almost in a whisper. Naomi, what are you hungry for today? Maria asked with a smile. Respect, said the young woman, her voice tight. Maria said nothing more. She simply pointed to the chair near the counter, poured a cup of coffee, and set a still warm slice of cake beside it. Naomi stayed. The next day, she came back. By the end of the week, she was already helping organize crates. A month later, she was selling couscous with joy, greeting customers by name. In no time, she became part of the shop, part of the family. She began calling Maria Aunt, and when someone asked who the new girl was, Maria would answer, she's the daughter of respect. Planted in pain, but watered with dignity, the scene stayed etched in the village's memory, because there, once again, Maria proved her shop didn't just sell goods, it sold fresh starts, it sold hope. It was a place where, with a look and a gesture, she taught that no one should be judged by body, by weight, or by appearance. And if one day Maria's house became the biggest shop in the region, it wasn't because of its size. It was because there, behind a simple wooden door, an empire of welcome had been born, a place where the greatest currency was humanity. And Maria, the woman once mocked for being too big to be loved, was now the one who loved without measure, and that no one could ever mock. The woman who had once been called dead weight by her own aunts, who used to walk through the village with her eyes on the ground and her soul shrunk by other people's laughter, had become the foundation of a place where many found the strength to stand tall. Maria, the one who for so long had known only closed doors and thinly veiled judgment, was now the name painted on the most respected storefront in the region, not because she chased it, but because she persisted. Because even while carrying the pain of being rejected by those who should have loved her, she never let bitterness define her. And the man who had once been just a quiet bricklayer, bent over the weight of cement and the silences of the world, was the first to see in her what no one else did. Not magazine beauty, nor a body for desire, but courage, capability, truth. Aiko never needed to say much. His actions spoke with the firmness of a well-driven nail. He built not just the shop, but Maria's sense of safety. He was her wall against mockery, her ground when the world tried to collapse. Together, they built something no money could buy, a reputation made of respect, a daily life made of partnership, and a home made of dignity. The shop grew, yes, but the greatest construction was invisible. The way they turned rejection into welcome, scorn into kindness, pain into service. Maria's house became a landmark, but more than that, it became a mirror where so many other women, silenced for years, could finally see themselves, and in seeing themselves, remember that there is still time, that there is still worth, that it is still possible to be loved, even after being ignored for so long. One afternoon, a young journalist from a nearby city showed up, curious about the buzz surrounding the fat woman and the bricklayer's shop. He wanted to understand what was so special about it. He asked Maria, how did all of this begin? She paused for a moment, glanced at the wall where the first photos of the shop still hung, crooked shelves, dirt floors. Then she looked at Aiko, fixing the gate with his usual patience, and she replied with a serene smile, the kind of smile of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. It began with a compliment and a brick, and in that moment, the journalist understood, because sometimes, all a person needs is someone who sees beyond what ordinary eyes perceive, someone who looks with tenderness, who believes before the world approves, who says, even without saying, you deserve this. That's what Aiko did, and that's what Maria gave back to the world, in the form of a shop, a home, a legacy. Maria's house still stands there, with its doors open. It's not just a business, it's a place where the soul rests, where the body is welcomed, where the past does not dictate worth. A place where no one, absolutely no one, leaves empty-handed, nor empty-hearted. And that's why, even today, anyone who steps inside for the first time feels in the air something that can't be sold, bought, or borrowed. The presence of a love that overcame mockery, a love that doesn't shout, but builds, brick by brick, truth by truth. And so this story ends. Or perhaps it begins again, every time a woman hears it, and whispers to herself, if she made it, maybe I can too. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our community.